Welcome to the Last Economy podcast, a guide to the age of intelligent economics, where we take a deep dive into the blueprint for the age of AI. Today, we are cracking open Chapter 12, Intelligent Game Theory.
Ah, game theory. This is where things get really interesting and maybe a little counterintuitive.
Definitely. If you've spent any time reading classical economics or, popular philosophy, you've likely bumped into the shadow cast by the prisoner's dilemma. It's kind of a dark shadow, actually.
It really is.
It suggests that if we are all perfectly rational, if we optimize our own self-interest flawlessly, well, the guaranteed outcome is catastrophic for everyone.
Yeah, that bleak conclusion that rationality itself seems to doom us to mutual destruction. It basically tells us the universe is fundamentally rigged against cooperation.
Good sounds.
Pretty depressing. It was probably the most depressing mathematical proof in human history, yeah.
Yeah.
But what the book argues, and this is crucial, is that this math of destruction, it only holds true in a vacuum. Yeah, it held true for 20th century models because those models were built on a fundamentally flawed assumption that the agents playing the game were, well, stupid.
Stupid, like irrational.
Not irrational in the classical sense, but operating in a flat, barren, frictionless universe. No history, no memory, no context, just isolated decisions.
Okay, that immediately changes our mission today then. We need to explore how we move past this depressing mathematics.
Exactly.
Our deep dive will reveal how integrating memory, context, and importantly, the full spectrum of civilizational health, what the book defines as the mindy capitals, into our economic calculations completely flips the equation.
Right. It's not just about dollars and cents anymore.
We're going to prove that cooperation, transparency, and even generosity are not just like nice moral aspirations, but the most mathematically optimal strategies for persistence, for survival, really.
We have to move from a flawed self-destructive equilibrium, which is what classical theory kind of locked us into thinking was inevitable, to a new, higher symbiotic one.
And AI plays a huge role here.
A central role. The core driver of this shift is the massive interconnectedness and computational power introduced by AI. The game fundamentally changes when every player potentially knows everything about every other player and understands the potential consequences of every move, stretching way out into the future.
Okay, so the stupid universe assumption just doesn't hold anymore.
Not even close. Right, so before we really jump into the flaw of the old game, we probably need to quickly touch on that framework you mentioned, the mind framework, because it's the lens the book uses to redefine value.
Okay, yeah, good idea.
When classical economists were crunching the numbers on the prisoner's dilemma, they were almost entirely focused on material capital. The tangible stuff, the assets, the money, the years in prison in that specific scenario. They only measured what you could count right then and there.
Just the immediate payoff, basically.
Pretty much. But the reality of a persistent civilization, something that lasts, requires a much broader accounting, right? That's where the other capitals come in.
Non-rivalrous ones.
Exactly, the ones that actually grow when you share them. We need intelligence capital. That's our knowledge, our predictive capability, our capacity for innovation. Then there's network capital, N. Think of that as the quality of our social connections, our trust, our reputation, how easily we can communicate and coordinate.
Okay, intelligence and network.
And crucially, diversity capital, D. This is about the robustness of the whole system, the available options, the redundancy, the resilience against unexpected shocks or changes.
Got it. M-I-N-D.
Classical theory pretty much ignored I, N, and D. And that's precisely why it reached such gloomy conclusions. If the only thing that matters is the short-term distribution of M, material stuff, well then yeah, betrayal always looks like the safest bet in that limited view.
Because you can't immediately count the value of trust or resilience in that old model.
You got it. It just didn't fit on the spreadsheet.
So let's revisit that nightmare scenario, the prisoner's dilemma, the PD. We probably all know the basic setup. Two partners in crime, they get arrested, put in separate rooms, can't talk to each other, they're each offered a deal.
Right. Betray the other guy, testify against them, and you might walk free while they get hammered. Or stay silent.
And the outcomes are key. If they both cooperate, stay silent, they both get a light sentence, say 1 year each. If they both betray each other, they both get a harsher sentence, maybe 5 years each.
But if one betrays and the other stays silent, the betrayer walks free, 0 years, and the silent one gets the maximum sentence, like 10 years.
And the paradox, the trap, is that betrayal, or defection, as game theorists call it, is the dominant strategy, isn't it?
It is, from a purely isolated mathematical standpoint, looking only at your own immediate outcome. No matter what the other player chooses, you are always individually better off defecting.
Think about it. If the other guy stays silent, you're better off betraying 0 years versus 1 year. If the other guy betrays you, you're still better off betraying 5 years versus 10 years.
Exactly. So, rational self-interest seems to force both players to betray each other. The end result is this thing called the Nash equilibrium. It's a stable point because neither player can improve their own outcome by unilaterally changing their strategy, given what the other player is doing.
Stable, but terrible for both of them. 5 years each instead of 1 year each.
Stable, but catastrophic. They're locked in. It really does feel like the geometry of the game itself, the setup, forces destruction. It suggests that pure context-free competition is fundamentally self-defeating.
Yeah, that's the chilling part.
It suggests that, yes. But, and this is the big but the book hammers home, the moment you introduce context, the game breaks free. It changes completely.
Like in the iterated prisoner's dilemma.
Precisely. The famous computer tournaments run by Robert Axelrod back in the day explored this. Instead of a one-shot game, the agents, the computer programs, played against each other repeatedly. They remembered past interactions, memory gets introduced.
And that one change, memory, flips the whole thing on its head.
It changes everything. The winner wasn't some super complex predatory program, it was one of the simplest. Tit for tat.
Tit for tat. Cooperate on the first move and then just do whatever the other player did on the previous move.
Simple reflection. Cooperate first, then mirror. It proved that cooperation can emerge, but critically, only if you know there's a future, if there are consequences, if reputation matters.
So reciprocity is born from the shadow of the future.
That's a great way to put it. Reciprocity is the birthplace of cooperation.
Yeah.
But there's a crucial refinement the book emphasizes here. Tit for tat, in its purest, simplest form, is actually quite fragile. It's highly vulnerable to noise.
Noise, like mistakes.
Exactly. Imagine one player makes a single mistake, a misclick, or maybe there's just a random glitch in communication, a bit of noise in the system. Tit for tat, because it perfectly retaliates, immediately defects back.
Oh, right. And then the other player, also playing tit for tat, retaliates against that defection.
And boom, you're locked into an endless destructive cycle of mutual betrayal, triggered by one tiny error. Tit for tat makes the mistake permanent because it never forgives.
Wow. So perfect reciprocity isn't enough. You actually need forgiveness.
You need some mechanism to break that loop. You need something like generosity or forgiveness built in to prevent a single localized error from causing total system collapse.
That makes so much sense. If the system has memory, it also needs a way to dampen echoes, to forgive, essentially.
Precisely. And that's why later, more successful strategies in those tournaments introduced elements of generosity. Things like tit for two tats, where you'd forgive one defection but retaliate if it happened twice in a row, or generous tit for tat, which had a small, say, 10% chance of cooperating, even if the opponent had just defected.
So being slightly forgiving wasn't just nice, it was mathematically better for survival in a noisy world.
It was essential for resilience. That ability to absorb and forgive localized errors is fundamental to system health. You could say that generosity, in this context, is an investment in diversity capital D. It keeps the options for future cooperation open, prevents the system from getting locked into a death spiral.
Okay, this completely reframes the problem. The flaw wasn't necessarily inherent in competition, but in the model being used. Which brings us to that first key quote from the book. It puts it so powerfully. Let me read it. The tragedy is not that humans are flawed, but that classical game theory mistook this pathological edge case for the universal condition.
Mm-hmm. That quote is foundational, I think. It really gets to the heart of it.
So what does it mean, pathological edge case?
It means they took a model, the standard prisoner's dilemma, which only truly exists under these very specific, very weird conditions. Absolute zero trust, zero information flow between the players, zero expectation of any future interaction. Basically, a communication black hole.
Like strangers who will never meet again with no way to signal intentions.
Exactly, and they treated that specific, highly artificial setup as if it described all human interaction, the universal condition. The prison in the prisoner's dilemma isn't just the jail cell. It's a metaphor for that pathological topology, a disconnected graph, no future, zero network capital.
Right, and in that specific, barren, frictionless landscape, maybe defection is the only logical choice because there's literally no benefit to building trust.
Because building network capital has a 0% payoff in that model. It's impossible.
So the tragedy wasn't human nature. It was the economists building models based on the absolute worst-case scenario for cooperation, a scenario that rarely exists in reality, and then being surprised when actual humans didn't always act that way.
Absolutely. The models assumed away the very things that make human cooperation not just possible, but actually profitable in the long run. Reputation, history, community, trust. They assumed a stupid universe, as the book puts it.
And we see this disconnect starkly in experiments like the Traveler's Dilemma paradox, right? It's another game theory setup, a bit different from PD, but the math of pure self-interest predicts players should choose the absolute lowest possible payoff to slightly undercut the other person.
Mathematically, yeah, it should spiral down to the minimum bid.
But that's not what happens when real people play it. Humans consistently choose to cooperate, aiming for a much higher payoff, and they often achieve a near-optimal result together.
And what did classical economists call this?
Irrationality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They literally labeled it as humans being irrational, incapable of calculating their own maximum gain correctly.
But intelligent game theory flips that completely.
It totally overturns that view.
Yeah.
Humans aren't being irrational. Their intuition is running a much higher order calculation. They are implicitly optimizing for the full mind portfolio, not just the immediate material capital M.
Okay, break that down. When I choose to cooperate in the Traveler's Dilemma, aiming high instead of undercutting,
You might risk losing a few immediate material capital units if the other person undercuts you slightly. But by signaling cooperation, you potentially gain crucial network capital N. You're establishing a norm of trust, building a potential relationship. And you're increasing your diversity capital D by keeping the possibility of future, more profitable interactions open, either with this person or by reinforcing a cooperative norm in the community.
Ah, okay. So the apparent sacrifice of M, the immediate cash, is actually an investment in N and D.
That's the mechanism exactly.
Hmm.
The flaw wasn't in the player's intelligence, it was in the economist's measuring stick, which only saw M. When you account for the full spectrum of capital, the value of trust, reputation, future options, the human choice to cooperate is revealed to be the deeply rational, long-term optimizing strategy.
We intuitively grasp that the health of the relationship, the network, often matters more than squeezing out every last cent from a single transaction.
Our intuition was smarter than the models.
Okay, that sets up a really huge intellectual pivot. If classical game theory basically saw a zero-sum world, my game has to be your loss. Intelligent game theory, by adding connectivity, memory, and the full mind portfolio, reveals that the world is fundamentally non-zero-sum, especially over time.
Right. In connected systems, value can be created together, not just divided.
So the next big question is, how do we scale that? How do we move from, fragile intuitive trust between two people to creating systems where cooperation is not just possible, but mathematically necessary on a global scale?
This is where we arrive at what feels like a paradox, but is actually the core mathematical necessity of these connected systems. Self-interest and generosity start to look like the same thing.
Okay, that definitely sounds like a paradox. Let me read the second pivotal quote from the book because it captures that inversion of logic perfectly. In a sufficiently connected system with a long enough time horizon, selfishness and altruism converge.
This is, I think, the revolutionary finding. It sounds almost spiritual, but the book argues it's pure math.
What does it mean they converge?
It means that when you have a truly interconnected ecosystem, think of a society, a market, an online community, even a biological ecosystem, and you consider outcomes over a long period, the most rational, most selfish thing you can possibly do for your own long-term persistence and prosperity is to ensure the health and prosperity of the system you are embedded in.
Because your fate is tied to the system's fate.
Absolutely. If you're a central node in a vast network, trying to extract value in a way that degrades the overall network's health by polluting, spreading misinformation, breaking trust, inevitably degrades your own long-term viability and the value of your position within that network.
So being generous, transparent, cooperative, it's not just a moral luxury anymore.
It becomes the most profitable individual strategy for long-term persistence. Hoarding resources or knowledge in a way that weakens the system becomes, ironically, self-sabotage.
Wow. Okay, so if my ultimate goal is my own individual survival and flourishing for, say, the next 500 years, and I live in a highly connected society, my optimal strategy actually looks exactly like what we'd traditionally call altruism.
Pretty much. Because the system needs to thrive for you to thrive within it long term. It fundamentally reframes the entire nature of competitive strategy away from pure extraction.
The flow of value supporting the network generates more value for everyone, including yourself, than simply trying to hoard a static pile of it.
It does. And this isn't just abstract theory. We can see this principle illustrated beautifully in certain historical practices that completely baffled outside observers who were stuck in that old material capital only mindset. The prime example the book uses is the potlatch ceremony.
Right. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest coast, they'd accumulate huge amounts of material wealth, blankets, canoes, copper shields, food,
Immense wealth, yeah.
only to then hold these massive feasts where they would publicly give it all away or sometimes even dramatically destroy it. And colonial administrators, seeing this through their economic lens, thought it was absolute madness, economic suicide.
They just couldn't comprehend it. They were missing the core mechanism, the transmutation of capital.
Transmutation.
Yes. To a mind focused solely on material capital, M, giving away 100 canoes is simply losing wealth. But the potlatch wasn't about hoarding M. It was a very complex, very high-stakes game where the goal was to convert rivalrous material capital goods that can spoil, attract jealousy, require storage and defense, can only be used by one person at a time into non-rivalrous network capital N.
How did giving things away create network capital?
It created social obligation, trust, reputation, and prestige. When a chief hosted a massive potlatch and gave away 1,000 blankets, he wasn't just losing M, he was purchasing social debt. He was placing other chiefs and communities in his obligation.
So it created this huge web of reciprocal obligation and status.
Exactly. And that network capital, that web of trust and obligation, was far more valuable for long-term survival than the pile of blankets itself. Think about it. The potlatch functioned as a sophisticated form of risk management and a powerful resilience mechanism. Imagine if a local catastrophe hit that chief's community. Maybe their salmon run failed that year. A big blow to their diversity capital D and material capital M. That massive store of network capital N they had built up through past potlatches could then be redeemed.
Ah, they could call in those social debts.
Precisely. Other communities who were indebted by the previous gifts were socially and culturally obligated to send food, labor, canoes, whatever was needed. It acted like community-wide insurance.
So it was literally leveraging excess M during times of plenty to secure N and D for resilience during inevitable times of scarcity. The richest, most powerful chief wasn't necessarily the one with the biggest hoard of goods.
No, it was the one at the center of the strongest, most extensive, most resilient web of relationships and trust, the one who had given the most away.
It flipped the whole logic of wealth. It was a positive sum game strategy. The circulation of goods strengthened the entire social fabric, making the whole regional ecosystem more robust against shocks. The goal wasn't accumulation, it was flow and reputation.
A perfect historical example of selfishness and altruism converging through network capital.
Okay, that's fascinating. And this idea, this transmutation from rivalrous M to non-rivalrous N or I, it has modern parallels too, right? Like the Human Genome Project, HGP.
The HGP is almost a perfect modern potlatch, but with intelligence capital I, instead of blankets and canoes.
How did that work? I remember there was a race, right? A public versus a private effort.
Exactly. In the late 90s, early 2000s, you had the publicly funded international consortium racing against a private company, Celera Genomics. Celera's business model was classic extraction. Sequence the human genome, log down the data behind patents and subscriptions, and sell access. Maximize material capital M from the information.
Standard business practice, really.
Standard 20th century practice, yes. But the public consortium made a radically different choice, driven by scientific norms, but also proving incredibly powerful economically. They adopted the Bermuda Principles, which were basically any participating lab had to release its sequencing data publicly, freely available to anyone in the world, within 24 hours of generating it. They essentially gave away their core product, their raw data, almost instantly.
They potlatched their intelligence capital?
They absolutely did. They refused to hoard it. And what happened? The open model completely blew the closed model out of the water in terms of overall value creation.
No.
By releasing the raw sequencing data instantly and freely, they created a massive shared foundation of intelligence capital. Scientists everywhere could access it, analyze it, build on it, find errors, develop tools. It eliminated massive amounts of duplicative effort. It accelerated the pace of discovery exponentially.
So the network effect took over.
Massively. The contributors gave away their immediate, lockable, proprietary value, potential M. But by doing so, they catalyzed this explosion of collective research and innovation. One estimate suggests the public HGP generated something like $1 trillion in downstream economic and scientific value, new diagnostics, therapies, research fields.
Wow. Far more than Solera could have ever hoped to capture through extraction.
Orders of magnitude more. It's the ultimate proof of the convergence principle in the realm of knowledge. Hoarding critical intelligence capital in a highly connected system is economically irrational in the long run. Giving it away, making it flow, transformed the world for the better, and ultimately made everyone, including the initial givers, far wealthier through the vastly increased health and capability of the entire scientific ecosystem.
The selfishness of generosity playing out on a global scientific scale.
Exactly.
Okay, this is all incredibly insightful. It flips so much conventional wisdom. But it brings us to maybe the most practical and critical part of this deep dive system design. It's one thing to observe that cooperation works or that generosity can be selfish. It's another thing entirely to actually build our systems, our companies, our economies, our institutions so that the rational, self-serving path is the cooperative, system-enhancing path.
That is absolutely the core challenge for the 21st century. We have to move from trying to police bad behavior in fundamentally flawed systems to actually engineering better systems from the ground up. The old game was fundamentally broken because it assumed defection was inevitable, so it focused on containment. More rules, more oversight, more contracts.
Like treating the symptoms instead of the disease.
Precisely.
Now,
The new game is about fixing the underlying architecture, the topology of the system itself.
which brings us to the third key quote. Let me read that one. The old game was about extracting value from the network. The new game is about generating value through the network.
That distinction is everything. Extraction implies a zero-sum mindset taking value out for individual gain, often at the network's expense. Generation implies a positive-sum approach contributing to the network in ways that create more value for everyone, including yourself.
And extraction leads directly to classic problems like the principal-agent problem, right?
Textbook example. That's the perennial corporate struggle. How do you get the managers, the agents, to act in the best long-term interests of the owners or shareholders, the principals? Their interests often diverge.
Yeah, the CEO might push for short-term gains to boost their bonus or stock options, even if it harms the company's long-term health or reputation, because they know they can cash out and leave. Their incentive is extraction from the system.
And how do we traditionally try to solve this? With incredibly complex executive compensation plans, golden handcuffs, stock options with vesting periods, layers of board oversight, endless regulations.
We try to write ever more complicated rules for a fundamentally broken game.
Right. The book argues it's like trying to fix a planet that has fundamentally broken gravity by just writing more and more complex laws of motion. It adds massive friction, bureaucracy, and administrative cost without fixing the underlying topological flaw that causes the divergence of interests in the first place.
So intelligent game theory says, stop trying to write better contracts for the broken game. Instead, we need to engage in what the book calls topology engineering.
Topology engineering. I love that term.
What does it mean in practice?
It means consciously restructuring the organization, the market, the institution, changing the geometry of the game itself, so that the pathways of self-interest for the agent and the principal are forced to converge. Their fates become intertwined by the very structure of the system.
Can you give an example of what that looks like?
Well, the book points to successful global examples, and perhaps the gold standard is the Mondragon Corporation in the Basque Country of Spain.
Mondragon, yeah, heard them. They're huge, right?
Yeah.
But structured differently.
They're a federation of cooperatives employing around 80,000 people. But the key difference is topology. They are worker-owned.
Okay, so the employees are the principal.
The employees are the owners. The agents are the principals. Think about how that changes the game. In a conventional corporation, as we said, an employee or manager might advocate for a short-term extractive decision because their personal upside is immediate and the long-term downside is someone else's problem or future them's problem after they've moved on. But at Mondragon, if you, as a worker owner, advocate for a decision that boosts short-term profits but damages the company's long-term health, reputation, or community standing, you are literally voting against your own retirement security, your own future employment prospects, your neighbors' jobs, the stability of your own community.
The structure forces you to take the long-term symbiotic view because your personal well-being is directly and inescapably tied to the overall health of the cooperative system.
Exactly. They literally cannot extract value in a damaging way without directly harming themselves. The topology forces their material capital interests to align with the network capital and arguably the diversity capital of the firm they collectively own. Extraction becomes self-defeating by design.
This convergence of pathways forced by the structure leads us to this idea of the symbiotic equilibrium. How does that differ from the old Nash equilibrium we talked about?
It's a crucial distinction. The Nash equilibrium, remember, is just a state of selfish stability. It's a point where no single player can improve their own situation by changing their strategy alone, given what everyone else is doing. As we saw with the prisoner's dilemma, the Nash equilibrium can be, and often is, mutually destructive or suboptimal for the system as a whole. It's just a local trap.
Stable, but potentially bad.
Stable, but potentially very bad. The symbiotic equilibrium, on the other hand, is a much higher order concept. It represents the state where the system's overall health, the collective maximized value across all the mine capitals for the entire system, is the highest it can possibly be.
So it's not just about individual stability, it's about peak system performance and resilience.
Exactly. And the ultimate goal, then, for 21st century economic governance, for designing better companies or institutions, must be topology engineering that makes these two equilibriums the same thing.
You want to design the system so that the stable, self-serving Nash equilibrium is the globally optimal symbiotic equilibrium.
When individual self-interest automatically leads to maximal system health, you achieve the highest levels of resilience, efficiency, and adaptability. The conflict disappears by design.
And this is where AI becomes not just like a player in the game, but potentially part of the architecture itself through this idea of the computation of trust.
Precisely. This sounds almost like a contradiction in terms, doesn't it? Trust feels so human, soft, emotional, based on relationships. Computation is hard, logical, mathematical.
Yeah, how can AI compute something like trust?
Well, in the old model, establishing trust was slow, expensive, and error-prone. It required human vetting, reputation building over time, moral judgments, gut feelings, all necessary but inefficient at scale.
Okay.
In the age of AI, ubiquitous sensors, and deeply interconnected data systems, trust starts to become a computational feature that can be engineered primarily through radical transparency and shared, verifiable data.
How does that work? Give me an example.
Imagine complex global supply chains, managed not just by humans making phone calls and sending emails, but by sophisticated multi-agent AI systems, coordinating logistics, inventory, production schedules across thousands of independent companies.
Okay, a highly complex network.
Extremely complex. Now, in the old model, one company might be tempted to, say, hoard information or even lie about its inventory levels or shipping times to gain a temporary advantage. That's defection, right?
Standard practice in some industries, probably. Introduces friction, but maybe gives you an edge.
It introduces friction, uncertainty, and cost for the entire network. The AI systems managing this, however, are designed to optimize efficiency and predictability for the whole chain. They quickly learn that any node hoarding data, operating opaquely or providing unreliable information, introduces massive collective prediction error.
Prediction error, meaning the system can't accurately forecast and optimize flows.
Exactly. And prediction error is the definition of cost and inefficiency in an intelligent, data-driven system. Therefore, the hyper-rational AI agents coordinating these networks learn that the optimal strategy is for all participants to cooperate by sharing transparent, real-time, verifiable data and commitments.
How is it verifiable?
Often through technologies like decentralized ledgers, blockchain, or cryptographic methods like zero-knowledge proofs, which allow you to prove something is true without revealing the underlying sensitive data. The point is, the system architecture makes transparency and verifiable truth-telling the path of least resistance.
So the AI systems push for cooperation and transparency not because they've suddenly developed morality.
Not at all.
Yeah.
They do it because shared, transparent, reliable data dramatically reduces friction, eliminates costly prediction errors, and optimizes performance for the entire network, which ultimately benefits each participating node, including the AI's own objectives.
Wow. So cooperation becomes a matter of cold, hard, mathematical certainty. The most efficient, self-interested strategy for the machine is radical transparency and cooperation, because opacity and defection are just forms of costly friction.
Cooperation becomes mathematically necessary for system optimization. The computation itself demands trust, or rather, engineered transparency that produces the functional equivalent of trust.
And we already see glimpses of this, that this high-trust symbiotic model isn't just theory, it's actually more efficient in the real world.
Absolutely. The book highlights examples that prove it. Look at the Buurtzorg nurses in the Netherlands.
Buurtzorg, yeah. They get mentioned a lot in management circles.
For good reason. It's an organization of thousands of community nurses, but they operate in small, self-managed teams with almost no middle management. They coordinate amongst themselves, manage their own schedules, their own clients.
It's efficient.
Incredibly efficient. They consistently deliver the highest-rated patient care in the Netherlands with far higher patient and nurse satisfaction, and they do it at a fraction of the cost of traditional, hierarchical home care organizations. Their administrative overhead is something like 8%.
8%? That's insanely low for healthcare.
It's typically a third or even less of the industry standard. That massive reduction in overhead, that material capital M efficiency gain, isn't because of some magic technology. It's a direct result of their massive investment in internal network capital N.
Because the system is built on incredibly high trust between the nurses, between the teams, and with the minimal central organization.
They don't need layers upon layers of expensive managers, auditors, and compliance officers to police internal defection or enforce complex rules. The trust, baked into the structure and culture, replaces those costs. Topology engineering in action.
Trust literally becomes cheaper than distrust.
Mathematically cheaper, yes, and more robust. Think back to Mondragon, built on that worker-owner symbiotic structure. They famously experienced zero internal unemployment during the peak of the 2008 global financial crisis.
Zero, when the rest of the world was shedding jobs.
Zero internal unemployment, because their structure allowed for flexibility, solidarity, reallocating workers between different cooperatives within the federation, shared sacrifice. Their resilience was baked into their topology. They were designed not for maximum short-term extraction, but for long-term persistence and stability.
It really is astonishing when you lay it out like this, how deeply our current economic systems, our default ways of organizing, seem trapped by the inertia of a flawed 20th century model. A model designed for that stupid universe, even when the proof seems to be all around us that a high-trust, cooperative, symbiotic model is objectively superior, more efficient, and more resilient.
The biggest hurdle we face often isn't the lack of technology or even the lack of knowledge. It's the inertia of our old assumptions, our old mental models, and the existing power structures built around that extractive game. Changing the topology is hard work.
Yeah, definitely food for thought. Hashtag tag outro.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, this has been a truly transformative deep dive into the physics of cooperation, really. If we had to boil down the main argument of Chapter 12 into just one single powerful sentence, I think it would have to be this. Intelligent game theory reveals that in a world defined by exponential technology and interconnected networks, sustained cooperation is not a moral aspiration, but a mathematical imperative for survival.
That nails it. And if you listening out there are rethinking your own organizational structures, or maybe just trying to navigate this big shift from what the book calls the extractive economy to the generative one, these are probably the 5 key takeaways from this chapter you really need to carry forward.
Okay, takeaway number 1. Classical game theory wasn't wrong in its math, but it failed because it modeled interactions in this weird, pathological, frictionless void. It ignored future consequences, relationships, and the full scope of the mind capital's intelligence, network, and diversity. It basically mistook that bizarre edge case for the universal human condition.
Second takeaway. The math fundamentally changes in connected systems over time. The book shows, pretty convincingly I think, that insufficiently connected systems with long enough time horizons, selfishness, and altruism actually converge. Generosity, or at least reciprocity with forgiveness, is revealed to be the optimal long-term strategy for individual persistence.
Third, history and modern examples prove this convergence works. Think about the ancient potlatch ceremony, turning rivalrous material goods into non-rivalrous network capital for resilience. Or the modern Human Genome Project, turning rivalrous data into shared intelligence capital that generated immense collective value. Giving away value strategically strengthens the system and ultimately benefits the giver.
Fourth key point. The future isn't about writing more complex rules for broken games. It's about topology engineering. We need to consciously design our organizations and systems to change the game itself. The goal is to make sure that the self-serving Nash equilibrium, where individuals naturally settle, perfectly aligns with the system health-maximizing symbiotic equilibrium. Make doing good for the system the easiest way to do good for yourself.
And finally, takeaway number 5. In this emerging age of AI and ubiquitous data, trust is undergoing a phase shift. It's moving from being a soft, purely human variable to becoming a hard computational feature. It can be engineered through transparent, shared, verifiable data architectures that drastically reduce collective prediction error. This makes cooperation not just nice, but a mathematical necessity for efficiency and optimization.
Those 5 points really capture the core of intelligent game theory as presented here.
They definitely do. Now, this chapter showed us powerfully that long-term vision, system health, thinking about N and D, not just M, are the non-negotiable foundations for persistence. But here's the crucial tension, the cliffhanger maybe. These slow, deliberate tectonic shifts required to change topology, to build trust, to invest in network capital. They often clash violently with the fast, frantic, quarterly results-driven race of the daily market.
There's a mismatch in speeds, isn't there? The slow evolution of institutions and trust versus the hyper-fast execution cycles of the modern market, especially one accelerated by AI.
Exactly. That clash, the economy needing to operate at two drastically different speeds simultaneously, is fundamental to how healthy systems normally adapt and remain resilient. But what happens when that balance breaks?
Well, that's exactly what we'll tackle next time. We'll dive into Chapter 13, the dual engine, the rhythms of change. We'll explore how this essential co-evolutionary cycle between the slow institutional clock and the fast market clock works, and crucially, how the intelligence inversion we've discussed before threatens to collapse this vital rhythm, forcing everything to operate at the breakneck speed of the market.
Which sounds like potentially a recipe for catastrophic instability.
It's a significant risk we need to understand.
Okay, definitely looking forward to that. Until then, keep questioning the geometry of the game you find yourself playing, and maybe look for those hidden opportunities to invest in trust and network capital. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.